final talk this morning, which is from Mark Broomfield, who is the air quality specialist consultant at Ricardo-AEA, but he's also an author. And but last year he published his book "Every Breath You Take: A User's Guide to the Atmosphere," and so which is an excellent read, very interesting. So thank you ever so much, Mark, for joining us from slightly further north than we are here. So I think you're coming in from Shropshire this morning.
Thank you very much, Adrian. So yeah, my name is Mark Broomfield. I live in Shrewsbury, where I'm speaking to you from right now. I am an author, and if you can see in the little video screen there, this is the book that I wrote, as Adrian said last year, Every Breath You Take: A User's Guide to the Atmosphere. And it kind of draws on my work as an air quality specialist consultant for the past 30 years or so. And I'm very pleased to be with you today on the day after Clean Air Day 2020. We're focused on Malvern in Worcestershire, a town where air quality is pretty good on the whole. But does that mean there are no effects from air pollution in a small town like Malvern? Well, no, it doesn't, and we'll talk about that as we go along. So I am going to start by showing you this little picture here of a guy whose name is Alex Segura Vendrell, and he's an architect from Barcelona, and his claim to fame is that he holds the record for holding your breath for the longest time ever. So I have done some tests with people on various talks I've done. We have try to hold our breath for as long as we can, and typically a few people in an audience this size can get up to about a minute or a little bit over. So just have a think, what would you think would be the world record for holding your breath in that context? Well, the answer is that Alex's record is 23 minutes and 4 seconds, which is pretty impressive, although he did breathe pure oxygen before going for his dip. Yeah, every few seconds, in practical terms, we have to breathe in, out, in, out. And why is that? Why do we breathe so much? And I was really interested to watch a demonstration from John Wood at the Malvern Virtual Science in the Park Festival earlier this year. And John showed that we're not breathing because we need oxygen specifically. What triggers that breathing reflex is to the need to get rid of carbon dioxide that's in our bloodstream. Ultimately, of course, we do need the oxygen to survive, but it's shifting that CO2 that makes our bodies take a breath, whether we like it or not. So this is showing, this isn't me, this is showing how we breathe. And luckily, everybody knows how to breathe, right? Well, let's see. And if you want to do this with me, if you put one hand on your stomach and the other on your chest, like this gent, there, and take a deep breath in, so breathe in, and just have a feel with the hand that's on your stomach. Did that move inwards or outwards? And as you breathe in, the idea, the way our bodies are made, is that your diaphragm drops, your stomach moves out, your lungs expand, and that draws the air into your body. It's a simple system, and it works pretty well. But I found that I wasn't like this. I do a little bit of singing in my spare time, or I used to when we were allowed to do such things. And this is me on the back row singing Bach B minor Mass. And I thought a couple of years ago it would be good to have singing lessons. And lesson number one was how to breathe properly. Well, it turns out I'd been doing it wrong my whole life. Somehow I was breathing in by raising the diaphragm, compressing my lungs, contravening the laws of physics, and breathing in that way. And I tried and tried, but just couldn't really seem to get it right, and definitely not singing at the same time. So that was really the end of my singing lessons, unfortunately, although not quite my singing career, I hope. But we've obviously got, it's good to be here in a technology festival and innovation festival. So I'm sure we have many people here who are very highly educated and well informed, and with a strong interest in technology and innovation. So I thought we'd see just how much we maybe already know about air pollution. So I've got a little quiz here for you. It's got 4 questions. So maybe if you could just kind of keep track of your score, how you think you're doing, and then, if you like, you can type how many you got out of 4 in the chat box, and we'll see how much you know about air pollution. So the first question is question 1: how much have sulfur dioxide levels improved by in the past 40 years? Do you think the answer is A, they've actually got worse, B, good news have halved, C, better news have gone down by 90%, or D, amazing news, sulfur dioxide levels have gone down by 98%? So just have a think about that, make your choice, and then here comes the answer. So the answer is D, amazing news. So sulfur dioxide is a real success story in many countries, including the UK. This shows the levels that were measured throughout the country in the last, well, from 1975 or so onwards. And as you can see, the levels have really dropped by an astonishing amount. So they're now, over the past 40 years, 98% lower than they were back in the 1970s. So that's a good news story. Question number 2, which of these do you think is the greatest cause of early death? Is it A, road accidents, B, water pollution, C, obesity, or D, passive smoking? So again, have a think. I see there's a few things going in the chat, so that's good. Well, the answer is obesity, coming in at 3 million early deaths worldwide per year. But there is one thing missing from this rather depressing list, which is air pollution, which comes in at 7 million early deaths every year. And so air pollution is greater than those other 4 environmental or external causes of death put together. So air pollution is really important, and these are people who statistically are dying earlier than we would expect, given factors about when and where you were born, your socioeconomic status, and your lifestyle. So in the UK, that amounts to somewhere around 40,000 people every year, and some of those people are even in a small town like Malvern. So question 3, which of these capital cities had the highest level of airborne particulate matter, or PM2.5, in 2019? So if you can make your guess from London, Delhi, Beijing, or Reykjavik. And PM2.5, the little figure there, shows that's particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 microns or less. So there's about 40 of those across a human hair. Let's see the answer. The answer is Delhi in India. So Delhi was number 1 out of 85 capital cities that the World Health Organization had data for in 2019. Beijing came in at number 9, just over 40 micrograms per meter cubed, compared to whatever it is, 90 something, I think, in Delhi. London was 65th, and I've just put this green line here. This is the World Health Organization guideline for PM2.5. And overall in London, levels are just marginally above the WHO guideline. So obviously not as good as being just below it, but so it shows that PM2.5 is having an effect on health in London. It would have an effect even if we were just below that guideline level as well. But obviously we're not as bad as some other capital cities. And Reykjavik came in 83rd out of 85. It's a small city, and also in Iceland, you also have a very isolated setting with 0 hinterland. It's a small island in a big sea, so that's why levels are so low there. So give yourself a pat on the back if you said Delhi. And then finally, question 4, what do you think is going on here? Is this surveying trees for air pollution damage? Are they swiping right on the new ecologist dating app? Are they measuring air pollution using lichen? Are they identifying the age of the tree before it's cut down to build a bypass? Well, this is the answer here, is that they're measuring air pollution using lichen. It's something that I did in a wood just near Shrewsbury while I was writing the book, which you can read all about if you wish to. You have to be able to identify oak and beech trees to do this, which is a bit of a challenge for someone like me, as my last biology qualification was the end of year biology exam at the age of 14. But I can do oak trees, so that was a start. And this method gives you an idea of levels and trends in ammonia levels in the atmosphere. And to me, slightly surprisingly, it turned out to be reasonably accurate and to reflect what we get from monitoring. So I think this is actually a useful way of getting additional data on air pollution levels in the environment. So that's my little quiz for you. there's a lot of some sort of introductions there to air pollution in the UK and around the world, and what it's doing to us. So how do we know all this information? And I'm going to show you a few ways of how we understand air pollution levels and we get this data. So you can see there on a lamppost is something called a diffusion tube, and I've got one here, as you can see my my screen here, but this small tube here is what we call a nitrogen dioxide diffusion tube, and inside the tube, if I can get the end off, is a coating. You suspend it from a lamppost like we see here, and as nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere wafts around, some of it gets absorbed onto the tube. You can send it off for analysis, and it tells you the average nitrogen dioxide level at that point over the past month. Costs about £10, which coincidentally is about the same price as a book on air pollution. And it's accurate to about plus or minus 30%. I'm not sure how that compares to the book. But they're very useful techniques for measuring nitrogen dioxide levels. So this is in Shrewsbury, where I live. Here, I don't know if you can see that figure. That is showing from Street View. That's one located in Malvern. You probably wouldn't be able to tell where that is just from that picture there, but just to zoom out a little bit, you might recognise this. The diffusion tube is on Housel Road, which is just near Malvern Link Station. And there are a few more diffusion tubes scattered throughout Malvern Hills District Council area, and in fact they're pretty much everywhere in the UK. So that's one way of measuring and understanding air pollution levels. We don't just rely on little bits and pieces like that, however, although apparently you do in Worcestershire, because none of the local authorities in there are doing air quality monitoring with anything more technical than a load of diffusion tubes. So I can't show you a monitoring station in Worcestershire, but I can show you one here in my town of Shrewsbury. This is just around the corner from Shrewsbury Station. And they have instruments that look a little bit like this. This is an instrument for measuring nitrogen dioxide again, I think. And it measures it, rather than giving you a monthly average, it gives you measurements every few minutes or every hour. It has connectivity, so you don't have to go and visit the instrument every time you want to download the data or check it's okay. But that's the kind of instrument we're currently using as our reference method for measuring pollutants like PM 2.5 and nitrogen dioxide, which I mentioned earlier. So that's monitoring. We don't just use monitoring, because when you take a measurement, that gives you a level at one place at one time. So what we also do is we have develop a set of computer models. There's a well-known quote about models, which says all models are wrong, but some are useful. We know that our air quality models are uncertain and definitely inaccurate, but some of them are useful. And here's an example of one produced by one of my colleagues, Scott Hamilton. And this is showing road traffic levels of nitrogen dioxide before lockdown happened. And then if I just click on one, that's after lockdown. So you can see the difference before and after lockdown. The levels of nitrogen dioxide were way lower during the period immediately when lockdown was introduced. So things have drifted up again more recently, but certainly during March and April, pollution levels were very low. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But these are the kind of results that we can get. Obviously, this is showing the strong influence of the motorway network and the trunk road network, and the much lower levels, particularly of road NOx, once you get away from those major sources. And of course, London and the M25 sticking out like a sore thumb in the bottom right-hand corner. So we can now measure, and we can even predict air pollution. So one very good question is, what are we doing about it? Well, let's go back a bit. We've been working on dealing with air pollution for a long time. Just think about your best guess for when the first air quality legislation was enacted. If you get it within a couple of decades, I shall be very impressed. The answer is the first air quality legislation in this country was enacted in 1273. And this was by Edward Longshanks, Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, king for 35 years, but also a bit of a tree-hugging environmentalist, as it turns out. They were finally running out of of trees to burn for wood at that stage in the growing cities. So coal, which had the advantage of being portable, flammable, and mined in the northeast of England, was an affordable alternative. But unfortunately, it's about the dirtiest fuel there is, quite apart from the carbon issues, which they were perhaps less bothered about at that time. It produces a lot of smoke and sulfur dioxide. So that's why this law was introduced to prohibit the burning of coal. And there were great fines and ransoms were on the table. Demolition of your furnaces. In Edward II's reign went a step further, and torture was permitted for those found fouling the air with coal smoke. So some quite draconian legislation, but it didn't work. Economics wins over environmentalism every time, and pollution continued to be a problem. So if we fast forward to 1661, here is the first air quality strategy that we know of. This was produced by John Evelyn, who was a courtier, and it's called "The Inconvenience of the Air and Smoke of London Dissipated." Evelyn associated air pollution with cough, slow birth rate, and high mortality, quite right, and also with exasperation and putrefaction of the humours, which is maybe not supported by the latest research. And also raised the problem of industrial odours. And his solution was basically to move all industry in the centre of London out to the east, essentially downwind of the city. And that would improve pollution in the city centre and would provide jobs and employment for boatmen to take people to and from these industries and goods and everything. So good idea, and I guess, and eventually we did that. So I spent my formative years in South Hornchurch, roughly at the end of the red arrow there. I can confirm that we more or less did move a lot of industry out to East London, Ford Company at Dagenham and many other industries out there to this day. And ultimately that did deal with the problems of industrial pollution in the centre of London, although it wasn't an immediate solution. As we can see, in the Victorian era, the smog was as bad as ever. Claude Monet painted the effects of smog on the Houses of Parliament. Charles Dickens in Bleak House wrote about the effects of smog, and one of his characters says, "On the contrary, it seems to do you good, miss, judging from your appearance." So Charles Dickens thought that smog was good for the complexion, or at least his character did. And in the 1950s and 60s, 100 years after that, smog was still a problem. So here are some pictures of the London smog of 1952. It was so bad that they had to cancel the greyhound races at White City because the dog literally couldn't see the rabbit. But when several thousand people died in a severe smog in December 1952, finally some action was taken through the implementation of the Clean Air Acts. And that was really what was behind that big decrease in sulfur dioxide levels that I mentioned earlier, dealing with coal burning. It was all about stopping burning dirty fuels of coal and oil in homes, businesses, factories, and power stations. And we're pretty much there with that now. Other pollutants are harder to deal with. So this is nitrogen dioxide over a similar time period, looking at the levels in central London. And you can see there has been a decrease. And it's sort of continued to go down a bit, but basically nitrogen dioxide comes at the moment these days largely from traffic. Catalytic converters have done a lot to reduce emissions from traffic, but their effect has mainly been to let us drive a lot more cars around, while air pollution gets slightly better. So without catalytic converters, air pollution would have been disastrous. PM 2.5, particulate matter, which is the main source of health effects of air pollution, is a lot more complicated. There's many more sources. Traffic is still a big part of the problem, but also domestic burning of wood, for example, is a problem for PM 2.5, agricultural sources, many different sources. And one of the problems is that most voters are car drivers. Pretty much all car drivers are voters, and it's difficult to make people change their habits and vote for something that's going to stop them doing what they want to do. But is that changing? I think that perhaps is changing. But before we go and look at the changes that are coming, let's just have a little look at pollution levels around the world. So as I mentioned, for PM 2.5, the World Health Organization guideline is 10. That's a safe level of PM 2.5 in the atmosphere. London, we're just above that. Beijing in 2013 was 85, but by 2019 that had come down to 42. That had halved. So there's a lot of progress in Beijing, across China as a whole, in dealing with air pollution. So it's high and getting better. Delhi in India, in the contrast, is high and getting worse. And Delhi is, as I mentioned before, the worst major city in the world. And air pollution is now responsible for 1.5 million early deaths every year in India. It's not just stopping cricket, as you can see here, but it's really having a major effect on health, well-being, quality of life, economics in India. So many people are interested at the moment in the effect of COVID-19 on all parts of our life, and the effect of COVID-19 on health is important. And one of the things that happened in the UK, we locked down on around about the 16th of March. For the period up to the 16th of March, this is the typical wind direction. So you can see that the wind came mainly from the southwest, and that reflects the pattern that we're all familiar with. The southwesterly winds are our prevailing wind direction. On the 16th of March, it was as if a switch had been flipped, and for the 6 weeks after that, the wind came almost entirely from the northeast. So that's a lot less common. I mean, it's not uncommon, but it's certainly very unusual to have this kind of weather conditions. But that really complicated our analysis of air pollution. So although there were immediate changes when the lockdown happened, were they due to the change in the weather, or were they due to changes in what we were doing? And we can look at that because we have models which help us to understand and predict what air pollution will do. So this is what we call a Q-sum plot, looking at the cumulative sum of differences. And this is looking at what we measure pollution levels to be compared to what we expect pollution to be if life was carrying on as normal. And normally you'd expect those lines to be all grouped around the 0 level. You'd expect what happens to match our models, if our models are any good. And up to the lockdown period, our models were pretty good for nitrogen dioxide. Everything's pretty much grouped around the 0 level. But once we get into lockdown, suddenly there's a big divergence. So all our predictions we're all over predicting. So the measured levels are a lot lower than we would predict, taking account of the weather. So that shows there really was a genuine effect on pollution levels in the UK due to lockdown. Ozone, interestingly, is a little bit different. So nitrogen dioxide tends to suppress ozone formation in urban areas in particular. So once we stopped emitting nitrogen dioxide from vehicles as much, suddenly ozone levels started, in most places anyway, started to go up. So ozone levels were higher than we would have expected, other factors being equal. And here is an example seen from space, so some satellite monitoring. So the darker picture here is for 2019. So this picture here shows the levels in 2019, and then the lighter picture shows the levels that we observed a year later in 2020. So that's not really looking at any of these meteorological issues. It's just going, what's the difference between 2019 and 2020? And as you can see by the change in the colouring, pollution levels were about half in 2020 compared to what they were in 2019. So there was a report by the Air Quality Expert Group, and that was highlighting some of the comments that I've just made. Nitrogen dioxide levels dropped, PM2.5 levels also dropped, ozone levels may have gone up a bit. And then there were some interactions between exposure to air pollution. So maybe your past exposure to pollution affects how severe your experience of COVID-19 might be if you're unfortunate enough to catch it. And also the initial indications were that outdoor exposure and transmission seems less significant than indoor. So indoor exposure seems to be the dominant pathway, and that's kind of reflected in the current policies and guidance and advice. What about the long term? Well, it's difficult to know, but I've put a few quotes up here. These quotes come from a book that was published last year, in which I was just wondering what the long-term future would be. So obviously I didn't know anything about COVID-19 then, honest. I thought that maybe in the very long term, perhaps due to energy pressures, we would have less travel, less emissions, and we might end up to a kind of a state-of-the-art, a mix of state-of-the-art low energy technologies and a return to something more like even a pre-industrial lifestyle. And well, we're sort of we're not there yet, but certainly lockdown has introduced us to remote meetings like this, for example. So what does the future hold? Well, delivering good air quality, I think, has become mainstream. For example, the Mayor of London has been elected on a platform to deal with air pollution. There won't be, you won't be able to buy a new combustion engine vehicle after 2040, and you won't be able to drive one after 2050. Air quality is on the front pages of the news every week, and there's a story in today's papers about pollution levels in different regions throughout the country. COVID-19 has had its has brought air quality again to the fore. It's been a focus of discussion. So I think air quality is mainstream now in a way that it wasn't 5 years ago, and I think that to me, that's, as having been working here for 30 years, that's really good. And why is that? Well, I think air pollution is important, but it always was. But now perhaps we know how important it is. We can make these estimates of 40,000 early deaths every year in this country, for example. We know what the cost is of that to different economies throughout the world. And also we have a pantomime villain. Who is that pantomime villain? Well, for us, that's been the Volkswagen, the Dieselgate story. That made a great narrative in some ways. There was a bad guy caught red-handed cheating us and our families of our rights to breathe clean air and have a healthy life. And that really tipped air quality, I think, into the mainstream media. The ability to tell that story, it made an interesting story, an important and a very relevant story, and a very serious story that required serious attention. So, but we're dealing with vehicle pollution. As I said, that's on the way out in many ways. It's not gone yet, of course, by a long chalk, but vehicle pollution will be decreasing a lot in the coming years. So what's left? There are plenty of sources left: agriculture, shipping, aircraft, wood burners, transport from other parts of the world. People sometimes ask, what can I do? What's my role? Well, I think there are things that we can all do at an individual level. We can do our bit. We can drive less. We can select lower emitting cars. We can live in a less polluting way. But I think also equally important is to keep talking about it, to keep air pollution on the front pages, make it an electoral issue for politicians. And of course, if you have the opportunity, please do feel free to buy my book. So thank you very much. That's all I had to say, and happy to deal with any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was really fascinating, really interesting. Yes, so anybody have any questions? One of the things that came out in your book, which I found quite interesting, is just how, well, first of all, how thin, of course, the actual atmosphere is compared to the rest of the globe.
Very fragile,
and also, how it does change as you go up in altitude. You talked a little bit about that as well. And I think people don't realize quite, the sort of the size scales that we're talking about, and actually how crucial the little bit is that we're down here under.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's what on the front of the book here, we've got these 4 layers, which my graphic designer put on there, showing the 4 layers within the atmosphere, which is driven by the chemical and the physical structure. So yeah, and every bit's different and has its different characteristics. We wouldn't survive long if we were living in the stratosphere, but fortunately we're not. I think one of the things that I realized writing the book was people are probably familiar with the ozone layer, and that was big news sort of 20 years ago or so, when it turned out we were harming the ozone layer with aerosols. And it seemed that we'd created this ozone hole, and then by changing what we were doing with aerosols, then we were able to fix it. And that's not really the case. That's not really the message from that. I mean, I think we probably are on our way to fixing it, but it was very quick to damage, and it's going to take us a long time to get that back to a position where there's no longer a significant ozone hole. The message from that really is not how easy it was to fix. The message is how easy it was to put a hole in it in the first place. It is a fragile environment. It's fragile for climate reasons, for air pollution reasons, for many other reasons. So, to me, it emphasised that we do have to take care of it.
So Penelope asks, what can farmers do?
What can farmers do? Yes. Farmers are great. They can be a bit of a law unto themselves. But yeah, agriculture is becoming more on the radar as being a significant contributor to air pollution, as we're dealing with some of the other sources. So I think for the farming community, one of the issues is how they dispose of their waste. So sometimes there's open burning, and open burning is a really bad idea for air pollution for all sorts of reasons. Please don't do it. Even bonfires are bad news. I mean, I know they're fun, but also they're bad news for air pollution. So yeah, I mean, using and one of the other main contributions is from windblown dust. So keeping dust levels down in whatever setting you are is always good news. I mean, it's good news for nuisance reasons, but it also contributes to particulate matter. And I think also, the whole kind of food supply industry will need to look at how they transport food and goods around the country, and that will continue to be an issue for a long time to come. So I'd kind of focus perhaps on those areas.
Okay, and Brian asks about air quality indoors, and what about it?
What about it? Really very good question. Air quality indoors is difficult because it's so individual to individual properties, whether you burn solid fuels or not, whether you have a gas cooker or an electric cooker. There are lots of different factors and how well insulated your house is. And it is difficult to distinguish between the effects of outdoor air pollution and indoor air pollution. And that's partly because air passes from one to the other. So I think some of the relevant factors for indoor air quality, I mentioned wood burning stoves. That can be a problem for indoor air quality, and as well as outdoor air quality. So I have a wood burning stove. It's quite a small one, but I think with wood burning stoves, the message is kind of use it infrequently if you can. Quite often it's a nice to have rather than a necessary part of heating your house. So use it less frequently and use it properly. So use properly seasoned wood and make sure the airflow is good and it's up to temperature and all those sort of things. I think in terms of other factors, I think it does become very individual. In terms of for example, volatile organic compounds coming off furniture or carpets. That's something that's, I think, improved in recent years, and that's down to the manufacturers as much as anything. So I would say that's probably the main issue I would focus on for indoor air quality. And of course, that is an issue in the UK, but it's a much bigger issue in parts of the world where people are have open fires in the home, burning solid fuels or whatever, and that's a major issue, particularly in parts of Asia and Africa, where people are burning solid fuels in the home. That can be a really significant effect, particularly on the health of women and children who are spending time in the home near the fire.